So as promised, we're going to see the reversal of a linked list using an iterative solution, and we're going to see exactly the code in PyCharm. So what I've done here is I've created a class node, and this is going to serve as the node of my singly linked list. And it's a really simple class that just has a single constructor that takes in as two local parameters. It takes in the element and it takes in the reference of the node that this node or the self node happens to be pointing at, the next node that the self node points at. So you may have already guessed that inside the implementation of the constructor, I'm using my instance variable element. In this case, is this case going to refer to whatever E is, and my instance variable next is referring to whatever my local variable N refers to. So given my class node, I'm going to use that class node to to actually construct a linked list. So before even looking at reverse linked list right now, let's just see how would I even construct a linked list. So I'm just going to invoke this constructor many times, and I'm doing this kind of in this case where I'm just using I'm calling my constructor node, which in this case is being referred to by head, and the element of my first node in this case is 1, and the second parameter is the next node that the node 1 points at, which happens to be in this case node 2, and then node 2 points at node 3, which then points at node 4, and node 4 points at none. So just to draw a picture here, just to make sure that we actually follow along, is that what I have right now is my head. This head over here is actually pointing at my node 1, which is this piece of the code here. Okay, but then 1 in turn, because the second parameter, this is the first parameter in the constructor of my node, and this piece over here is the second parameter that goes into the constructor, which in this case is pointing at 2. 2 then points at 3. 3 then points at 4, and 4 eventually points at none. And now what I've done here is I've written a function called reverse linked list, which takes in as an input, a head, and this head is this head that you're referring to. Okay, and what it actually does is it takes in that head, and it does some manipulation. It does a mutation on that linked list, so that my new linked list after the reversal. Now, when I'm using the word new, all I mean in this case is I'm not really creating an entirely a brand new linked list, but I'm just going to mutate on that original linked list, and I'm going to change that original linked list to make it look like this. Okay, so this is the idea. So this is the idea. This is what I'm going to eventually come at. Okay, and I'm hoping to show all of these things actually using PyCharm here. So I've got my IDE. I've written some code previously, and what we're going to do right now is step to the code, and make sure that my loop invariant holds, and that my loop invariant doesn't get violated at any of those 4 points that was originally raised in my previous video. So let's do this. Let's just step through the code now, and let's call my function reverse linked list. I'm going to pass in this head, which is this head over here, and this entire function returns back to me the head of the reversed linked list. Okay, and the reverse linked list is this code over here. This entire code is this code that I just took from my previous video, but I had completely formulated, and let's just see what happens. So let's just put a breakpoint right now, and I'm going to put a breakpoint here so that we can see exactly what is happening step by step here. And let's just debug this code out. So let's hit debug. Okay, and I've just hit my breakpoint here, but I'm going to step over right now. I'm going to do a step over to show you the linked list that has been created at this point. So when I do a step over, I can see that head in this case is pointing at the node that contains the element 1, the next of which points at the node that contains the element 2, the next of which then points at the node that contains the element 3, and you get the idea. The entire linked list has been created for me. Okay, so this is a good way to debug your code out, and just to make sure that things are still okay. And I see that my linked list that I originally planned has been created. Node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4, and the next of this case is pointing at none. Okay, so far so good. Now let's step into this method. Let's actually see what's happening inside the method reverse linked list. So I need to pass in my head. Head in this case is this entire is this linked list here, and more specifically, head is just a reference that happens to be pointing at the first node of my linked list. So let's do that. Let's just do a step into now. So my step into the shortcut for step into is F7. So let's do a step into, and again my loop invariant. Okay, so my loop invariant is something that should be true just before the start of the while loop, right? So let's execute this line, let's execute the second line, and just before the start of the while loop is my loop invariant. My loop invariant should hold at this point 1. It should also hold just before the start of the body. So the body of my loop is this piece here. This entire thing is the body of my loop. Okay, and just after the body of the loop, just after the body of the loop, right there, just after it is point 3. Okay, so this is point 2, point 3, and at some point when the loop terminates, and just before the return statement executes, this is point 4 that my loop invariant should hold. And again, I would highly recommend that before watching this video, as you should be watching my previous video just to understand how we formulated the loop invariant for the reverse linked list. Okay, so let's see that. Let's just make sure that my loop invariant holds just before the start of the while of the loop here. So let's do a step over. Let's just step over 2 places here. Okay, step over. Okay, good. So now the I'm just about to execute the Boolean expression in my in my while loop. And before I do that, my loop invariant said that you should be pointing, the reference you should be pointing at that portion of the linked list that remains to be reversed. What is that portion of the linked list that remains to be reversed? It's the entire linked list. The entire linked list at this point needs to be reversed. So where should you be pointing at? You should be pointing at the node with the element 1. And that's exactly what I see here. As per my loop invariant, I can see that you is pointing at that node with the element 1, and I can see that it is pointing at this entire linked list. It's this entire linked list that needs to be reversed. Where should head be pointing at? Head should be pointing at that portion of the linked list that has already been reversed. Okay, so what is that linked list that has been reversed at this point? Well, nothing has been reversed at this point, right? I'm still just starting off my problem here. So as per my loop invariant, head is something that should be pointing at none. Okay, excellent. So far so good. Let's just step over. Okay, so that point 2, nothing has changed from this point 1 to point 2. So point 2 still should be exactly the same as my loop invariant at point 1. And I can see that head is none, u is still pointing at that portion of the linked list that needs to be reversed here. Okay, so if I do step over, step over, step over, okay, and before I walk through the second iteration here, what is it that my loop invariant tells me? My loop invariant tells me is that you should be pointing at that portion of the linked list that needs to be reversed. What is that portion? So again, let me just draw a picture here just so that we understand what has happened so far. What has happened so far is that I've got this node 2 pointing at 3, 3 is pointing at 4, and 4 is pointing at none, and my node with the element 1, okay, I've got my head pointing at node 1, and the next of 1 should be pointing at none. And in my earlier video, I had this pink line here, and the pink line, in this I'm just going to use a green line, and my green line is this idea that everything before the green line has been reversed, and everything after the green line, which is being referred to by you, is something that needs to be reversed yet. This portion of the linked list hasn't been reversed. Everything before that has been reversed. Okay, so does my loop invariant hold here? What is u pointing at? U is pointing at the node with the element 2. Excellent. That's what my picture is telling me. That's what my loop invariant is telling me. What should head be pointing at? Head is something that should be pointing at the node with the element 1. Let's just ensure this actually holds here. Head is pointing at the node with the element 1, and the next of which should be pointing at none. So far, everything is consistent with my loop invariant. Okay, let's just go one iteration again of the entire loop. And before we start the third iteration here, I've got now head. Head is pointing at 2, the next of which is pointing at node 1, and the next of which is pointing at none. What should you be pointing at? You should be pointing at that portion of the linked list that needs to be reversed. You is pointing at the node with the element 3, the next of which is pointing at the node with the element 4, and the next of which is pointing at none. Let's just do one more iteration. Okay, let's just do one more iteration and see what happens. Head is now pointing at the node with the element 3, next of which is pointing at 2, and then the next of node 2 is pointing at the node 1 and none. Okay, good. This makes sense. It makes sense in the sense that this portion of the linked list, whatever head is referring to, is already getting reversed. Okay, everything over here is getting reversed here, and likewise everything that you is pointing at, everything that you is pointing at is needs to be reversed. Okay, this is needs to be reversed, and everything over here is already reversed. Okay, and head is always pointing at that node of the linked list that has been reversed here. Okay, so because this piece still needs to be done, this piece is still remaining, so I have one more iteration to walk through my code here. So let's just do one more pass at my code. So let's do a step over. Okay, at which point if I see now head is pointing at node 4, u is pointing at none. Okay, so my entire linked list has been reversed here, and just after the loop breaks, what did I say my loop event should hold here? So just before executing return, meaning just after the loop breaks, when would the loop break, meaning when would the loop terminate? When would the loop terminate? The loop would terminate when this condition over here becomes false. When this condition becomes false, meaning u should be equal to none for this condition to become false here. So in this case, when u is actually false, in this case, when u is actually none, none not equal to none becomes false. When that becomes false, the loop breaks, and this point 4, which is just before you execute return head, right? I'm just going to draw this line, just something just right there. Okay, my loop invariant should hold as well, and my loop invariant does hold at that point because head is that portion of the linked list that has already been reversed, and u is pointing at that portion of the linked list that needs to be reversed. Well, at this point nothing needs to be reversed, everything is done. I'm done with my task that was given to me. And because I'm done with my task here, what is it that I should return back? Just return back head, because head is pointing at 4, the next of which is pointing at 3, the next of which is pointing at 2, and finally the next of which, if I expand this out, it's pointing at 1, and one of which should be pointing at none. Let's just see that too. Okay, next is pointing at 1, and next of 1 is pointing at none. Okay, so at this point the loop breaks. Because it breaks, I do not go into the body of the loop, and now all that remains is to return head. So again, I'm hoping you found this useful. I hope and hoping that my previous video on the intuition of the loop invariant on the reversible linked list and this stepping through the code gives you a little bit more clarity. All right, thank you.